Hi, welcome to this video. This is a video about all grain brewing. If you've gone from extract brewing to all grain, it's not that big of a difference. You're just going to need a few pieces of equipment. First and foremost is a burner and a brew pot. This is going to start your mash. We're going to go over the mash tun in just a moment. This is a mash tun. This is a cooler. You could use another brew pot. Just use a cooler. It's going to keep the temperature of your mash, which a cooler will do. It will insulate the temperature. And what it consists of is a valve, usually brass or stainless steel, and a manifold or a screen you could use. This manifold is made out of CPVC. Readily available at Home Depot or Lowe's. You'll see little slits in here. The slits are to filter out the wort and keep the grain in the mash tun. We'll go over this whole process in a little bit. This is the manifold installed inside the cooler. The slits are on the bottom. And what we're going to do is we're going to get our mash temperature from our brew kettle up, and we're going to be putting that water into the mash tun, and then we'll be doing the grain. First and foremost is a little bit about the recipe. I like to use a program called Beer Alchemy. It keeps track of all of my recipes, and I can bring them out for brew day, and this lets me know what I'm doing. The first thing I'm going to do is get my mash water ready. I need to get that temperature up. For this particular batch, it's going to be about 151 degrees. A lot affects that temperature. The air temperature around where I'm brewing and my grain temperature. Right now my grain temperature is 78 degrees, so I need to get my mash water up to around 165. Program called Sparge Pal. It gives you all of the information you need, how much water you're going to need, the particular temperatures of what we're dealing with. So I have a grain temperature of 78. I want to get a target mash of 150. So I'm going to start 4.1 gallons of water and get it up to 161 degrees. And then that's going to start our mash. It's got to be around 161, and we're just about there. What I want to do is I want to empty this water first into the mash tun. With the water entering the mash tun, this is what your grain looks like. When the grain is, I bought this from the store, this is basically already crushed. They mill it for you at the store. This is a mixture of the 4 grains I have in here. This is a base grain of 2-row pale ale malt, Vienna malt, Carapils, and Caramel 20. This particular one is for an IPA, and let's add it to the mash tun. All the water is in the mash tun right now. What you didn't see is me lifting it up there. This is one of the things sort of starting out is, I don't know how many pumps to pump the water. It's all gravity fed. So all that water is now in the mash tun. I like to elevate it for what comes next. And now let's add the grain. When you're adding the grain, just make sure not to have any large clumps. You're going to mix this in slowly. You don't want any what's called dough balls because that won't break down. So be sure to mix all that in. Not too hard that you're going to dislodge that manifold, but enough to where everything is wet. You're basically making a big giant batch of oatmeal at this point. Now once that's all in, you want to close the lid and keep that temperature, and that's going to mash for 1 hour. Now the sparge, is what's going to come after this hour, is going to require 4.5 gallons. These numbers are going to change depending on what size batch, how much grain you use. The total grain bill for this particular batch is 13 pounds of grain, which requires a total of a little over around 9 gallons of water total for this batch. Even though that's not what we're going to end up with, we're going to end up with 5. So Just to prep, I put in 4.5 gallons into my brew pot. We're going to get that up to around 175 degrees. The reason for that is that's going to actually stop the mash when we pour that in to the mash tun, and that'll come next. Alright, our water is just about at temperature to sparge. I'm going to show you something real quick. Going back to the mash tun, I'd like to take a piece of tin foil, lay it on top of our grain, and we're going to do what's called vorloffing. Basically make the grain act as a filter in itself. Through all those little slits that I showed you earlier in the manifold, you want to bring the wort, the rich sugary wort, without bringing in the grain. You do not want any grain in your boil, so this is going to act what's going to separate it. So basically vorloffing is taking any container. I actually just use the water container, cut a lid off of it, and we're going to open this valve up slowly, and out comes the wort. But in that wort, as it is right now, are little pieces of grain that we don't want. So by doing this slowly, all of those husks of the grain actually start to fill in those little slits and act as a filter to take out all of the little bits of grain that we don't want. You do this a few times. If I fill this up maybe once or twice, and we're going to pour it right back in actually on the top, it's going to come out pretty clear. Just going to slowly pour that over. And that's what those little holes in the tin foil are for. We're letting the water sort of dissipate over all of the grain, not just in one spot. Reason for that is we don't want to remove any grain that's already in those little slits in the manifold. The water I was getting up to around 175 degrees. I'm now emptying into a bucket. This is a fermenter bucket, which I'm sure you've seen in many beer making kits. Water is off of that and into my bucket. It's basically just going to be gravity fed. Opening that valve, bringing the water down into here over the tin foil, and we're going to come out of there and directly right into our boil kettle. Alright, so we've reached the end of what we have in the sparge tank going into the mash tun. Once this completely drains out, you'll have your complete boil volume. And with boiling and with grain absorption, you're going to lose some of that water. So in the beginning I told you it was around 9 gallons. Like I said, when we're done we're going to have around 5 gallons when we're ready to drink. So this is pre-boil. This will probably be around 6.5 or 7 gallons. You can see the wort is much clearer now. Basically we've pulled all of the sugars we can out of that grain, and this is coming towards the end of what we're gonna be brewing with today. That's gonna be that. Let's see what we end up with here. Yeah, we got about 6 3/4 gallon. Okay, all the wort is in the brew kettle. Burner is on, and what we're going to go for here is wait for it to get to boiling. We have about 50 degrees to go to get there after all said and done, and then we'll do our first hop addition and we'll start the clock on the boil. This will be a 60-minute boil when it's ready. This is without a doubt my favorite part of brewing. I absolutely love the smell of these hops. They just go right into these bags, and we'll be ready to start. While we're waiting for the water to come to boil, it's a pretty good time to clean up everything. In the mash tun, you're going to have what are basically called spent grains. Looks like a mess. A lot of people do all kinds of stuff with this. Fertilizer, compost. You can even make dog biscuits out of it. The magic of video. We're all cleaned up here in the mash tun, And our brew kettle is just about at 210 degrees. And we are just about ready to add our first hop addition and start the clock. And here we go. This is a 1 ounce of Centennial hops. I'll just let that go and come back in a little bit. Just going to give this the occasional stir. Kind of get an idea of the color of the beer now. Okay, we're approaching the 45-minute mark of the boil. We're going to be adding our second hop addition, which is another 1 ounce of Centennial. At the same time, I add that. Right after I add that, I'm going to be putting in the chiller. The reason for that is while we're boiling, it sort of sanitizes that, because this is going to be in your batch of beer actually after we stop the boil, continuing to cool it. And at that point, it's very critical everything is clean. Anything that touches the beer has to be sanitized. At the same time, we're going to add some yeast nutrient. Second hop addition, 1 ounce of Centennial, 15 minutes left in the boil. And while that chiller is in there, it's a sterile environment because it's over 212 degrees, it's boiling. We have 15 minutes left in the boil, at which point we'll add, we still have 2 more hop additions. And now with 5 minutes left in the boil, I'm going to do 1 more hop addition. After this, and then we'll start cooling. And finally, with our last minute in the boil, we're going to add 1 more ounce of Centennial. At this point, we'll be getting ready to turn on the chiller, and I'll show you how that works. Okay, this is the end of the boil. We're going to turn the gas off, flame off, and now we still have 210, 212 degree water. So now we have to get this down to pitching temperature for yeast, which is around 75 degrees. So to do that, we're going to use this immersion chiller. All it is really just a garden hose coming in, goes around a coil, hot water comes out, and you'll see that hot water go out there into the driveway. Okay, what you're seeing there is water coming out of the chiller. Water coming in from the tap is probably around, I don't know, 70 degrees or so. So it's transferring the heat from the brew kettle out to that water. And you'll start to see this temperature drop fairly quick. While we're waiting for that to cool down to pitching temperature, I'll just show you what the yeast is. This company is called White Labs. I really like to use it. It's a liquid yeast. Comes in vials. There's dozens of different strains of yeast. One quick thing about now that we're below boiling temperature for anything that touches the wort at this point needs to be sterile. I use a product called Star San. Probably heard of this. Star San is a very safe acid sanitizer. Temperature's coming down pretty good now. We're going to start transferring soon. Okay, I'm going to start my transfer into my bucket. I like to run it through a strainer. There's going to be lots of trub that comes out of the bottom here. This sort of catches any of the hop or grain bits that have made it through. Once we add that nice color of the beer, and we'll let this drain off. Although that may look like beer, it is not ready to drink. I'm going to take a gravity reading. Now that the beer is about to be closed up and fermenting, I just want to get an original gravity reading. That's done with a hydrometer. Checking our hydrometer. We're going to just record this. This is going to give us our alcohol later. Before I close this up, I'm going to give this a really good spraying with Star San on top. This is going to basically just anything that might have fallen on top of that. Now we're going to seal this up. And we're going to add a bubbler in the top. And that's going to ferment for a while. We're going to take that into the house, into the basement. Let it sit around 67, 70 degrees for about a week, and then transfer it to the secondary fermenter and add our dry hops. In the cellar you can see this is bubbling. We're about 20 hours away from closing up that can, and fermentation has started. What you're seeing is the sugars are being eaten by the yeast, turning it into alcohol. Okay, we're 1 week into primary fermentation. The bubbler's just about stopped. It doesn't mean fermentation's over, but we've reached the point where we need to transfer into our secondary. We're going to do a gravity reading in a little bit just to check how far we've gotten. But first we need to sanitize everything for our secondary. I'm going to use Star San. Used this earlier. We're going to clean our lines and our carboy just to get ready to transfer. Just going to remove the bubbler out of the top. This will break the vacuum when we open the spigot. With the line connected, we're just going to open this spigot. Let it go right down into secondary. This is a glass carboy. I like to use this for secondary fermentation. And we're just going to let that fill up, and we'll be adding our dry hops directly to this when it's done. It's just about empty, and we'll get ready to take a gravity reading before we close this up and add the hops. This will be our final gravity basically. I got a reading here of 1.010, which is just about the lowest we're going to get on this batch. In the end, the alcohol level came out to be about 5.6%. Just going to directly add the dry hops. I'm not going to use a hop bag this time. We're going to be caning off this secondary into a keg when secondary fermentation is complete in about a week. To close this up, we're going to use the same bubbler, but basically a rubber plug that's going to fill the top of the glass carboy. Everything should be sanitized, and we'll seal this up. Get ready to put this in there in the basement back for another week. The inside, what we're going to clean up now, I'll just show you what's left. This is a lot of the yeast trub and hop trub that you're left with. You see how much the yeast replicated from that one little vial. Okay, we're 1 week from primary fermentation and 2 weeks from brew day. We're going to keg the beer today. Beer is going to be going into a corny keg. We're going to fill that corny keg with a little bit of CO2 prior to us starting. We just want to make sure everything's clean. CO2 will evacuate the oxygen as we fill it. We use a racking cane out of the carboy, and it's basically like a vacuum. It pulls the beer down into the keg. This will just sort of gravity feed after a while, and you'll start to see the foam come out the top. This is the Star San that was cleaned out of there. You don't have to fear the foam. It won't harm the beer. We're going to give everything a spray with Star San before we close it up. And this is just a hatch that goes in the top, pulls down, creates a seal. Carry this over to the fridge. We connect our CO2 line, around 12 pounds. Leave it sit for a week. Then it'll be ready to drink. Connect our beer line on the other side. And 1 more week we'll be drinking it. good stuff.